Hello and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this Tuesday morning. This is a look over the Ben Franklin Parkway. Roosevelt Boulevard is known as the most dangerous highway in the city of Philadelphia. A local state representative is taking measures to change that. State Rep. John Taylor, alongside Councilman Taubenberger, the Bicycle Coalition, and AAA have all teamed up to introduce a new bill that calls for a 5-year test run. It will issue tickets to speeders clocked by radar guns and cameras going at least 11 miles over the speed limit. Fox 29's Steve Keeley is on Roosevelt Boulevard in Northeast Philly with more.
The Philadelphia Police Accident Investigation Division says that 2018, at its midway point in the summer, had already surpassed the average number of people killed each year on this deathway known as the Roosevelt Boulevard. And now, 3/4 of the way through the year, 13 killed already in 2018, and that number already approaching double the 8 killed all of 2017. Speed often a factor, even those crashes happening when drivers go through red lights. Made worse because people often speed up and floor it, seeing the light turn to yellow ahead.
I think that's a good idea.
That sound good. That sound real good.
By next week, the governor of Pennsylvania is expected to sign a bill to allow speed cameras for the first time, passed by the legislature yesterday. And here's what's expected to happen after the cameras go into effect as early as January. 9 cameras spread out over the 12 miles of the Roosevelt Boulevard, from 9th Street in the Hunting Park section to past the far northeast up to the Ben-Salem line. 11 miles an hour over the 40 or 45 mile an hour limit here, and you'll eventually get a $150 ticket if you ignore the first warning and the first offense of $75 fine. No points, though, on your license. Police have to pull you over and write you a speeding ticket for that to happen.
We can't stop, ironing out a few kinks from keeping people safe and getting home at the end of the day. We're here to save lives.
Last year alone, 3,000 crashes on this one road, and speed a factor in most, police say.
Well, I think it will be a lot before it's like they get it perfect. I think a lot of people go more than 40, depending on like the time of day.
I think it's going to do a lot of mistakes and we're going to get tickets.
The bill also includes speed cameras through active highway construction zones, where you often see those fines double signs. They'll be on Pennsylvania's Turnpike and all the big interstate highways like the Schuylkill Expressway if you're in a construction zone. And they'll also give you a warning. 2 big signs warning you the speed cameras are ahead before you approach them.
I pray that they would do something about this death boulevard. It's not fair to everybody losing their families.
On the boulevard in Northeast Philly, Steve Keeley, Fox 29 News. Back to you.
Thank you, Steve. And over in New Jersey, a record number of people were killed on New Jersey's roads last year, the highest in 24 years. 138 pedestrians were killed in accidents across the state, including one of the most dangerous roads is Route 130 in Bordentown, especially for people trying to walk across it. Officials are trying to change that with a new campaign. This morning, our Karen Hepp met with Bordentown Police to discuss this campaign.
People were killed on New Jersey roadways last year, in fact, the highest in 24 years.
138 pedestrians were killed in accidents across the state, including 12 people in Burlington County. One of the most dangerous roads is Route 130 in Bordentown, especially for people who are trying to walk across it. Officials are trying to change that with a new campaign. So Karen Hepp is right there, Route 130 in Farnsworth Avenue, and this is one of the worst intersections, Karen?
Absolutely it is. Here's the chief, Brian Pesch. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So the new campaign, part of the problem is our cell phones were always looking down, so it's heads up, phones down. What's
Absolutely.
The problem?
Too much distractions. You know, with our motorists and our pedestrians, motorists are looking at their phones and not paying attention. They're not yielding to pedestrians in crosswalks. Pedestrians have their earbuds in, their heads are down. They're not paying attention to their surroundings and can't see potential cars coming.
So we have a young man standing over there, and what's interesting about this intersection is that side of the street is Borden Township.
Township, yep.
And then this side over here, which is why a lot of people need to get over to public transportation, is Borden City.
Yep, and we have a major highway that separates the two.
And that's why we're having so many problems. Just this August, we had a case of a guy that was crossing here that was very seriously injured. We have a young man coming across, and then we had this tragedy. We have a picture of this young woman, Angelica. She was a student. She worked over here at the McDonald's, and she was crossing the street, and she ended up getting hit. What happened? What went wrong?
Yes, unfortunately, she was walking home from work, doing the right thing. She went to cross 130. She crossed against the light and was struck and killed by a passing motorist.
So we see here, and our photographer Mike can also show, there is a wall dividing this highway because you've had so many problems. On this stretch alone, how many deaths have we had just this year?
Just this year on Route 130 in Burlington County, we've had 6 fatal collisions.
Which is a shocking number. It's because you can see that people go really fast. This is a major highway. So what do you want to see happen here?
Well, to make it more pedestrian friendly, we would like the DOT to invest in more pedestrian infrastructure. We need more signal heads. We need more crosswalks. We need sidewalks. We need more, these medians are very narrow. We need to, make them bigger. We just need a more pedestrian-friendly highway.
All right, so hopefully we'll get the DOT. I know you're trying to work with them because this is their highway. It's not yours. You can't just go out here and paint, crosswalks.
We have opened up dialogue with them. We're working with them to try to make these improvements.
Well, hopefully, and you're going to be giving this out. You have your fine sergeant over here, and who's this other gentleman?
My lieutenant.
Hi, Lieutenant. They're wearing the hottest new accessory for all of Bordentown right now.
That's right.
So you're giving these out. What other signage are you putting out there so people get the message about, we got to be aware?
We have blanketed the town with our posters. We have officers that are going to be handing out safety cards at intersections. We have a lot of enforcement. We're going in our schools. We're educating our kids. We've partnered with all our hotels to not only put our posters up, but to hand the safety cards to their guests, because a lot of our walkers and pedestrians are hotel tenants. We have 12 hotels in this town, so that's a big demographic that we have to reach.
Hotel seniors and the kids. Thank you so much, Chief, for your time. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll raise some awareness and people know, today's walkers, where we're looking at a phone, they can have deadly results. All right, guys, back to you.
Thank you so much.
And we want to thank them, too, Karen, for giving us some of these wristbands so we can help spread the word. And hopefully this will catch on.
These are great. You walk in the evening, even put a couple of these around your bicycle at night and let people know that you're on the roadway as well.
It's a great idea. So we're grateful for the Bordentown Township Police.
The FBI investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh could wrap up as early as today. Doug Luzader in Washington, D.C. spoke with Fox 29 Good Day this morning.
The FBI investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh could wrap up as early as today.
And that would clear the way, of course, for a possible vote in the Senate later this week. But it comes as President Trump continues to attack one of Kavanaugh's accusers. Doug Luzader has more from Washington.
President Trump faced a large and adoring crowd in Mississippi last night, and he did not hold back much when he questioned the veracity of Christine Blasey Ford, who has accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault.
How did you get home? I don't remember. How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember. How many years ago was it? I don't know.
Blasey Ford's attorney went to Twitter and called it a vicious, vile, and soulless attack. Meantime, the FBI may wrap up its report on Kavanaugh and his accusers as early as today, which could clear the way for full Senate confirmation.
So the FBI report will be finished, and we'll be voting this week on the Kavanaugh nomination.
Democrats have already in some ways moved beyond the FBI report now, questioning Kavanaugh's temperament and seeking more delays, citing McConnell's efforts in 2016 to successfully block President Obama's nominee for the court, Merrick Garland.
The gall of the man to complain about a one-week delay for an FBI hearing when he held up a nominee for the Supreme Court and kept the seat vacant for 10 months is staggering.
We'll wait until the investigation's done. I'll make a decision.
And under a great deal of pressure now, two Democratic senators from red states, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota. New polls show their states' voters decisively back Kavanaugh.
Once again, that FBI investigation expected to wrap up later today. Republicans pushing for a vote by Friday. Wait and see.
Okay, we'll certainly be covering that.
2 weeks ago. He could have done it last week. He's now insisting he'll do it this week. Democrats have no say. He talked about an agreement that caused a week delay. Who was the agreement with? 3 Republican senators. The majority leader knows that it was Republicans who caused him to delay, both for the FBI investigation and for Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford to testify. He didn't have to do that. He had the power. He's to blame for the delay, but he couldn't do anything otherwise because his own Republicans insisted on it. Again, it is a blatant falsehood. I'm so tempted to use the L word, but he's my friend, to say that Democrats caused the delay. Mr. Leader, assert your power to determine what's put on the floor and be a man up and say it's your decision, not ours. We have nothing to do with it. And third, he says, one of the most qualified nominees we've ever seen. We know what's going on here. Everyone, including the majority leader himself, knows that Kavanaugh is a deeply flawed candidate for a whole lot of reasons. Knowing that, the majority leader and the Republican majority have to divert attention from Kavanaugh. So they're focusing on people who did nothing wrong, like Senator Feinstein, like Judiciary Democratic minority, like the Democratic Party. It's outrageous. But they know that Kavanaugh is not very good, and they know his testimony hurt him across America. I was talking to a CEO, a Republican of a major company, said his board was happening to watch the debate, and every one of them changed their mind after seeing Kavanaugh testify. They said, this guy doesn't belong on the bench, we can do better. That's the overwhelming reaction of Americans. Judge Kavanaugh hurt himself dramatically, permanently, by his screed, his nasty partisan screed. That's something of a new, unschooled, two-bit politician, not someone who wants to be on the Supreme Court of the United States. And he hurt himself. Leader McConnell knows that. The Republican leadership knows it. Donald Trump knows it. But they have to get the focus off Kavanaugh. And so they come up with these straw men and women. They come up with these false innuendos, distortions, and dishonesty. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Now let me turn to the president. And let me condemn, in the strongest possible terms, the comments by President Trump last night about Dr. Ford. President Trump's outright mockery of a sexual assault survivor, riddled as it was with falsehoods. Let me say that again. President Trump's outright mockery of a sexual assault survivor, riddled as it was with falsehoods, was reprehensible, beneath the office of the presidency and beneath common decency from one person to another. President Trump owes Dr. Ford an immediate apology. For too long, far too long, survivors of sexual assault have been afraid to come forward because they thought that powerful men would shout them down, and destroy their character. The President of the United States, the most powerful man there is, confirmed those fears for millions of women in the most despicable way possible. President Trump should send a message to the women of America right now that he's sorry for saying what he said about Dr. Blvd. Ford, that survivors of sexual assault should not only be heard, but treated with dignity and respect and compassion. You don't have to believe everything Dr. Ford said, and I do, to refrain from the nasty, vicious attacks riddled with lies in sort of a mobocracy type way. And yet, Donald Trump shows no restraint, no regulator, He is the prime example of why the norms in America, regardless of politics, regardless of party, are declining. And we don't hear a peep out of my colleagues on the other side, with a few notable and noble exceptions. He's ruining the norms of America. He's so degrading the way people treat each other. It's pathetic. And it does permanent damage to this republic unless his own party members or others close to him speak up. Anyone who watched Dr. Blasey Ford saw a credible, courageous woman who elected to relieve the worst night of her life because she felt a civic duty to come forward. That action took immense courage. She's not the first. This is not unusual anymore. We know thousands of women who were hurt and then afraid to come forward, mainly because they thought they would be ridiculed, disbelieved, just as President Trump appallingly and despicably, lowly, did last night. Dr. Ford's actions took courage from a woman who admitted, she's far more honest than Donald Trump, who admitted that she was terrified to speak in public about her very private pain and trauma. I've been disappointed by President Trump's comments before, but this is a new low. President Trump should apologize immediately. I repeat that. And now, what will my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do? Ignore President Trump's comments, sidestep President Trump's comments, spend their time blaming Democrats, even though we had no say in the delay. That was 3 Republicans. We know what they'll do. It's shameful. The president is, day by day, tearing down the norms that have built this country up. We've had the greatest norms, the greatest character, the greatest behavior of any nation ever. But it's declining now because people of goodwill allow Trump to do it without criticizing him. And it's about time they did. It's about time they did. Now, shifting focus back to events here in Congress. We have to get back to reality and truth and focus on treating the Supreme Court nomination debate the right way. When all is said and done, this is about the nominee's credibility and temperament. I've said it before, I say it again. There are many who say what happened when someone was 15 and 18 doesn't indicate their personality and what kind of person they are when they are 53. Well, I believe Dr. Ford, and I believe what she said is very relevant. There are many who don't want to consider that. But there's an issue that should matter even to them, and that is the credibility and temperament of Judge Kavanaugh. This is what he is at 53. If he can't tell the truth about previous encounters, engagements, behavior, and activity, which we have found over and over and over again with Judge Kavanaugh, he doesn't deserve to be on the bench. That's why we need an FBI investigation. That's why Republicans stymied Leader McConnell in his headlong rush to have a vote and demanded an FBI investigation. It wasn't Democrats, we know that. Because they wanted to get to the truth. Because credibility of a justice on the Supreme Court is a very, very important characteristic. And right below it is temperament and lack of partisanship. And unfortunately, at least from initial indications, Judge Kavanaugh is not high on any of those 3 lists. That's why we need the investigation, and that's why we need it thorough. We need it to be thorough. But we still don't know how thorough of an investigation the FBI is conducting. As of last night, Dr. Blasey Ford and her list of corroborating witnesses have not been interviewed. While Deborah Ramirez has reportedly been interviewed, her attorney says a list of corroborating witnesses have not. NBC News is reporting that more than 40 people with potential information for the investigation have not been contacted for interviews by the FBI. I've heard the story over and over again. People call the tips line, that's what they're supposed to do, and they don't get a call back. This may be vital information. We want to know the truth. It can all be done in a week. The week that Senator Flake and Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski asked for, not that Democrats asked for, although we certainly agree with it. But that's not what caused Leader McConnell to delay, and every Republican senator knows it. So that's why we need this to be a thorough investigation. Without a clear sense of what the White House has told the FBI to look at in this investigation, we have no idea if the FBI is doing a real investigation or simply preparing a fig leaf at the direction of the White House for Republicans to vote yes. I understand the difficulty of the FBI. I have a great deal of respect for Director Wray. He's been pushed around. They've been ridiculed by the president. Brave men and women who risk their lives for us are part of law enforcement. But the FBI has a duty to do, and Director Wray has a duty to the reputation. And if he's being constrained by the White House, he has an obligation to let us know. And certainly, Counsel McGahn has an obligation to let us know what constraints he has placed upon the FBI. So here's what needs to happen. First, the White House must publicly release in writing what the White House counsel has instructed the FBI to pursue. If the FBI is not interviewing these witnesses that Ms. Ramirez's attorney presented to them because Counsel McGahn or Donald Trump has said don't do it, we ought to know that. And certainly not just we ought to know that, the senators who requested the FBI investigation ought to know that. Second, Leader McConnell should arrange an all-senators briefing from the agent in charge of the investigation before the vote. We should know what he did and what he didn't do and why. And third, the findings of the FBI investigation upon completion should be released publicly, with any personal information redacted. This is not the usual practice, but it's been done in the past when it's needed, and it's sure needed now. The FBI should do it. These three steps would go a long way to ensure the public's faith that the investigation has been conducted fairly, fully, and properly. This debate, this nomination, Mr. President, is about whether Judge Brett Kavanaugh has the character, the credibility, the impartiality to serve on the nation's highest court. In order to be an effective judge at any level, you need to be impartial, you need to be dispassionate. We don't ask our judges to be perfectly neutral, but we can't tolerate judges who are nakedly partisan either. Judge Kavanaugh himself has said that most obviously a judge cannot be a political partisan. Those are his words, but that's just what he has shown us he is in his long history and now in his recent rant. The testimony Judge Kavanaugh prepared for the judiciary last Thursday, prepared testimony. This was not just on the spur. This showed who he was, and it was steeped in partisan resentment and acrimony. He tried to implicate sitting senators in a calculated and orchestrated political hit job. That's what he said to the senators he was interviewing. He was being interviewed by. He denounced left-wing opposition groups who don't have close to the power the hard right has had in pushing our Republican colleagues around to rush this nomination through. But we don't hear about them. And then, topping it off, he portrayed the recent allegations against him as revenge on behalf of the Clintons. I dare say that Dr. Ford didn't have the Clintons on her mind once when she wrestled and struggled with whether to come forward. It's an absurd charge. Absurd. He even told Democratic senators, what goes around comes around, which to many ears sounds just like a threat. A judge telling people what comes around goes around? What goes around comes around? A judge, a Supreme Court justice says that when he's nominated? We can certainly do better. Even if someone is with the same ideology as Kavanaugh is chosen, someone who doesn't do things like that should be before us. And I hope that person won't be chosen, of course, if he has Judge Kavanaugh's ideology, which is why one of the main reasons I was against him to begin with. We should never forget. It's likely Judge Kavanaugh will greatly impede or eliminate a woman's right to choose. It's likely, or it's very likely, he will get rid of health care, including pre-existing conditions. It's likely he'll allow presidential overreach. Those three substantive bases motivated most of us to come out against Kavanaugh even before his awful testimony. I understand Judge Kavanaugh felt his character was under assault. I understand how he's feeling angry and upset. I understand responding to questions in the heat of the moment with words you might later regret. But these were prepared remarks. It takes a partisan to see a partisan conspiracy against him. As a conservative fellow at the Brookings Institute, former Kavanaugh defender Benjamin Wittes wrote in a column entitled, "I know Brett Kavanaugh, but I won't confirm him." Judge Kavanaugh's opening statement was an unprecedentedly partisan outburst of emotion from a would-be judge. I do not begrudge him the emotion, even the anger, but I cannot condone the partisanship, which was raw, undisguised, naked, conspiratorial from somebody who asks for public faith as a dispassionate and impartial judicial actor. His performance was wholly inconsistent with the Congress we should expect from a member of the judiciary. That's from somebody who's a conservative and a Kavanaugh supporter. The courage that a good number of both Kavanaugh's friends and observers like Wittes are showing in realizing that this guy's too much. I wish we saw a little more of that from the Republican side, because they know deep in their hearts this guy shouldn't be on the bench. We know they know. Now, the judge's partisanship at a hearing raises questions, as I've mentioned. But the biggest issue against Judge Kavanaugh, in my judgment, is credibility. The number one issue. Does Kavanaugh always tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Whatever you think of what he did as a 17 or 18-year-old, what Judge Kavanaugh has said as a 53-year-old matters. Whether you think the 17 or 18-year-old behavior should be part of the decision, which I do, or whether you don't. The harsh fact of the matter is that Judge Kavanaugh has repeatedly danced around the truth on issues large and small. In 2004, his first confirmation hearings. 2006, his second, and now again in 2018. On things like what happened when he did in high school and college and law school, to things like grand jury proceedings and White House controversies. Again, he has danced around the truth and never been direct and often tried to mislead. We cannot have a Supreme Court justice whose credibility is in doubt. That will hurt the nation for a generation. So I ask my colleagues, whatever you think about what Judge Kavanaugh did at 17 or 18, think about what he said at age 53. Think about the credibility of the man now as a grown adult and a judge. Think about whether we want to put someone who has been so partisan with questionable credibility on the court, or whether there is someone better. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. The clerk will report the unfinished business.
House message to accompany H.R. 302, an act to provide protections for certain sports medicine professionals who provide certain medical services in a secondary state.
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Mr. President, I unfortunately don't have enough time right now to respond to everything the Democratic leader has said, but I do want to say this. The most accurate statement that the minority leader made is he was against Judge Kavanaugh from the start. No one should be confused about this being a search for the truth. This is about search and destroy. Now, I think the Senate conducted itself appropriately. The Judiciary Committee conducted itself appropriately in giving Dr. Ford a chance to tell her story. I've said all along, I want Dr. Ford to be treated just the same way my daughters or my wife or my mother would be treated under similar circumstances. And I think we met that standard. But we know that the goalposts continue to be moved by our colleagues. This idea that you can assassinate a man's character, resulting in threats against his family, ruin his reputation and his future, and expect him to be a human punching bag and not respond forcefully? It's incredible to me. This should be about a fair process, but a fair process means that the people who ultimately decide should have an open mind at the beginning. You wouldn't want to walk into a courtroom and talk to a jury or a judge where the jury had already made up their mind. You would want them to listen to the evidence. That's what a fundamentally fair process means. And it also means that if somebody's going to make an accusation against an individual for a crime, which is what has been alleged against Judge Kavanaugh, that they would have to come forward with more than just an allegation. They'd have to come forward with witnesses, proof, evidence. Because under our Constitution, people are presumed to be innocent of crimes unless proven guilty. They are accorded due process of law, a fair hearing, a fair process. And unfortunately, as a result of the mishandling of Dr. Ford's confidential letter to the ranking member, contrary to her wishes and without her consent leaked to the press, she has been thrust into this three-ring circus. She was not told by her lawyers that the Judiciary Committee had offered to send a bipartisan team of professional staff out to her home in California to interview her confidentially. Why would her lawyers not tell her that? Because they wanted this three-ring circus? They wanted, despite Dr. Ford's wishes, not to be thrust into the spotlight? They evidently thrust her into that spotlight, raising the question in my mind, who are they working for? Are they actually working, these lawyers working for Dr. Ford? Or do they have another agenda and another client in mind? Well, the idea that now this has all come down to what somebody wrote in their high school yearbook is beyond parody. I mean, you can't make stuff like this up. And the judge, we know the judge is belligerent because he threw ice allegedly on somebody in a bar in college. Of course, the reporter who wrote that had previously sent out a tweet demonstrating his bias against Judge Kavanaugh. But now it's accepted as fact. And man, we're going to defeat this man because he threw ice on somebody when he was in college. Or we're going to go through his college yearbook. You know, I wonder what every senator in this chamber's college yearbook says, or high school yearbook, I should say. I hope that's not the standard. The Senate is an institution that operates based on precedent. If this is the precedent for future nominees, woe be to us, because we won't be able to recruit the best and brightest people to come serve in the judiciary or be subjected to this inquisition of a confirmation process. Like I said, Mr. President, there's more I want to say responding to the Democratic leader's comments, which I couldn't disagree with more. He'd already made up his mind, and so this is now about trying to build a case against the nominee. The problem is there isn't any evidence. And so in its place, what he wants to do is presume the guilt. Because somebody said something in their their high school yearbook, they ought to be disqualified. Because they allegedly threw ice on somebody when they were in college, that's disqualifying. That's making this whole process a laughingstock. This is the opposite of the sort of fair and dignified process that we should be following. But now, at the request of many senators, the FBI is going to be reporting back to the Senate on their supplemental background investigation. Will that be enough to satisfy those who have said all we need is one more week in order to allow the FBI to question more witnesses? Well, we see now that they've moved on, that regardless of what happens with this supplemental background investigation, they won't be satisfied because they had their minds made up already, even before Dr. Ford's letter became public. This is an embarrassing, disgraceful way for the Senate to conduct itself. We do not honor ourselves or this institution by handling this nominee like this, and this nomination and these witnesses, including Dr. Ford, like this. I don't know what it's going to take for us to change, but one thing can't happen is we can't let these despicable tactics and this strategy win. Because if they're able to destroy the reputation of a sitting judge based on such flimsy stuff, that means this same precedent will be applied to future nominees. And woe be to us. And what a terrible disservice, not only to the good men and women who want to serve in government, but also to the American people. The thing I hate most about Washington, D.C., and its insular culture is that some people don't just want to win the argument. Some people don't want to just win the election or win the vote. They want to destroy their opposition. Destroy them. That's why people are talking about, even if the judge is confirmed, well, maybe over in the House they'll start impeachment proceedings. One of the members of the Judiciary Committee said, if the judge is confirmed, it won't stop there. I'm not going to stop. What does that mean? We need to vote. We need to get the FBI report, and we need to vote. Because the longer this circus continues, the more embarrassing it becomes to the Senate and to the senators who work here.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, later today, we're going to have an opportunity to vote on the Opioid Crisis Response Act. And I want to take some time in complimenting all involved in bringing this legislation forward. First, let me start by acknowledging the problem in Maryland. And what the problem we have in Maryland is throughout our entire country. Recently, I was at the MedMark Treatment Center in Baltimore City, and I had a chance to see firsthand efforts being made by the local community, by private sector, and by government to deal with those who have addiction issues as a result of the opioid crisis. And I must tell you, they're making progress, but the problem continues. The problem continues in every community in Maryland. I've had similar roundtable discussions in Western Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, in the Baltimore and Washington metro areas, in all parts of Maryland. In every community, they tell me that the crisis of overdose is still increasing, despite efforts made by local communities to try to deal with the addiction issue on many fronts. On the front of law enforcement, on looking at different ways of dealing with pain medicines, and looking at ways to deal with people with addiction issues. But as we know, with the widespread use of addictive opioids, they hit the market. People became addicted to the opioid medicines through prescription medicines that were not used for its proper purpose. Later, they used heroin, which was cheaper than the opioid medicines. People became addicted to that, and more recently, heroin's been diced with fentanyl, which can be very deadly, much more powerful than heroin or opioids, and people end up in the emergency room. In many cases, they end up dead. Congress has responded. We passed the 21st Century Cures Act, which was a bipartisan bill that set up a framework with dealing with alternative ways of handling pain rather than using addictive opioids, and dealt with providing significant resources to local government to deal with the issues in law enforcement and in prevention and in dealing with people with addictions. And of course, the passage of the Affordable Care Act provided third-party reimbursement for people with behavioral health and addiction, which helped not only those that are in the exchanges on private insurance, but also those in the Medicaid system. So we've done a job in trying to respond to it. And now we have the legislation before us, the Opioid Crisis Response Act. I'm very pleased about the provisions. Many committees provided input.